I interned at Amazon twice throughout college. Here's my experience. My first internship with Amazon was in 2021. It was the first internship I ever had, and because of that, I really had no idea what to expect. Up until the most recent semester before I started at Amazon, I was still a business major, and I had only taken a couple different computer science courses. And to top it off, most of these courses were freshman level courses that I struggled pretty hard in. I was really worried about not being good enough at my internship, and I had some serious imposter syndrome because I felt like I was not prepared enough for the job. After all, my preparation had just been the 300 LeetCode problems that I'd solved during my preparation for the internship interviews. And if you've ever worked in software engineering before, you'll know that being able to solve LeetCode questions isn't all that helpful on the job. So for the first 3 weeks in my internship with Amazon in 2021, I was super stressed. On my first day, I remember having to wait until 2 p.m. to call my manager to set up my computer, and every minute from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. was complete agony. Because I couldn't do anything until I had my computer set up, and I couldn't set my computer up until I'd met with my manager, I had nothing to do, and I felt like that whole time I was just falling more and more behind with every hour that had passed. And because of that, I was in a state of complete panic. I remember having to take a bunch of quick little walks in that 5-hour span that I wasn't able to do anything just to calm my nerves down a little bit. Sure, in hindsight, those feelings were completely overblown, but in the moment it felt way too real. Eventually, I met with my manager, we got my computer set up, and later on in that first week, I was introduced to my intern mentor, which is your primary point of contact with your team and the person that'll help you out with any questions that you might have about specific code or about your intern project in general. During that first week, I was also introduced to my intern project, which is what I'd spend my 12 weeks at my internship completing. After learning a bit about my project, I tried to do some research about some of the tools that I should use for my project, but in that research, I couldn't really understand anything that I was looking at, and I got disheartened again. But as the weeks went on, my internship project became much more defined. My intern mentor gave me some much needed help, and I was able to get a grasp of what I was doing and make substantial progress on my project. I went from sitting very confused and stressed at my desk to being able to confidently code. My imposter syndrome faded as I continued to complete goal after goal, and by the end of the internship, I had completed not only the project's basic goals, but also the stretch goals and received a return offer to come back to the team for the next year. So that was my 2021 internship. And in 2022, I was feeling pretty confident about my coding ability. Last year's project was much easier than I'd imagined. I cruised through all of the different deliverables for my project and received a return offer at the end. So I went into my second internship expecting something similar, but my expectations were very wrong. In my first internship, my project dealt exclusively with tools that Amazon themselves had built. And all of these tools had extensive documentation and in many cases, videos to go along with how to implement each specific tool. But in my second internship in 2022, things were very different. Not only did I have to work with Amazon's internal tools, but I also had to work with third-party libraries. This was a huge curveball that was thrown at me because I'd never worked with third-party libraries before. For some context about why this was such a big deal to me, all of my coding experience, including LeetCode and the classes at school, they're all very closed systems, meaning that they all have these graders and these helper functions and already pre-built systems to go along and make your coding experience easier so that all you have to do is write a couple of algorithms through a couple functions to get your homework finished. And while that's great for testing students on their algorithmic capabilities and their thinking, it can be a little bit more difficult when these same students have to code things other than just the algorithms to solve those questions. In other words, classes and LeetCode are like a game's easy mode, where the game kind of holds your hand throughout each quest, whereas in real life, you're on hard mode. You don't really get that same initial sense of direction, so it's a lot of trial and error to get things right. In classes, there's often very little documentation that you have to read because almost everything is laid out for you in the write-up. And if you don't know what the write-up is, it's just the instructions for how to complete your homework. And I remember spending so much time in my classes complaining about how vague the write-ups are, but now I completely get it because it's very similar to real life, where no project is just completely set in stone for you and very easy to figure out from the get-go. So anyways, back to my project, I was very taken aback by having to work with this third-party library. And to make things worse, there weren't any code examples at Amazon that had worked with the library before, so me and my intern mentor were really on our own for this project. In my first month in my second internship, there were often times where I wasn't even sure if it was possible to write the code that I was instructed to write. And it was at this point where I realized that I'd overlooked a couple of different things when estimating the difficulty of my 2022 internship. And they were, first, that this is my second internship at Amazon. I was already familiar with a lot of the tools that I was working with from my internship in 2021. So obviously the people who planned my project for my second internship took this into account and slotted out a lot less time for me to get acquainted with Amazon's internal tools, meaning that there would be more work overall to get done in my internship. The second thing that I overlooked is that this internship was for a full-time return offer. In my first internship, the end goal was just a return offer to come back as an intern the next year. In my opinion, an intern can be a lot less qualified than a full-time employee, so the bar for receiving a return internship offer is a lot lower than the bar for receiving a full-time offer. On top of those two reasons, I think the goals for my second internship were just a little bit harder in general. So yeah, that first month was not at all what I expected, and similarly to my first internship, I spent a lot of those first few weeks pretty stressed out. My mentor describes the first few weeks working at Amazon as drinking water out of a fire hydrant, and I thought that was both funny and accurate. But as the weeks went on, similarly to the prior year, the panic subsided and I got used to dealing with the ambiguity that comes with dealing with third-party code. Throughout my second internship, I went from very anxious about diving deep into documentation to being comfortable turning to it when I didn't have the immediate answer. And that was mostly through a trial by fire, just having so many different little errors that I had to turn to the documentation to in order to figure out my problems. So that was the work side of things for my Amazon internships. Both times I started out very stressed, but as each week went on, I felt a little bit more confident about my abilities, and both internships also ended with me receiving return offers. So now about what it's like to live in Seattle in the summer. In 2021, in my first internship, I lived in the University District, which is the area of housing around the University of Washington, which is just a couple minutes drive out from downtown Seattle. And a lot of interns typically like to live here because the students at University of Washington all sublease their apartments for the interns who come in, and these sublets are generally a lot cheaper than trying to find an apartment to do a short-term lease. So even though I lived in the University District, I often commuted from the University District to downtown Seattle to either hang out with friends or get some work done in the offices. The one thing I will say about the offices in Seattle is that they're really beautiful. There's maybe a little more than a dozen Amazon offices in the heart of downtown Seattle, and they were all built within the last couple of years, so they're almost completely made out of glass, and looking at them from the ground is really so stunning. On the insides of these offices, there are ping pong tables, there are things called agile desks where anyone can come in and take a desk and work at it for a day, as well as conference rooms on each floor that you can book out for a day or for an hour or for however long. And this is usually how me and my friends spent time together during the work days, is that we just book out a conference room and then all of us would gather and work there for a day. In 2022, my office moved from Seattle over to Bellevue, which is a city about a 15 to 20 minutes drive away from Seattle. And because my office was in Bellevue, I decided to move to Bellevue for my second internship. And that turned out to be a little bit of a mistake. And it was a mistake just because my team worked pretty much all remotely, so I never got to see them when I went to the Bellevue office. And all of my friends were still stationed in Seattle. And when I wanted to hang out with my friends, I'd have to take public transit for almost an hour just to get to downtown Seattle from Bellevue. So if you have an internship coming up in Seattle and you're not sure where to live, I would highly suggest looking at the University District area. I think it makes a lot more sense to live either there or in downtown Seattle because that's where most of the interns are in the summer. And being in a closer proximity to the rest of the interns makes it a lot easier to meet and hang out with people. So that was my living situation. In terms of the activities that I actually took part in Seattle, I'm kind of a homebody, so I didn't experience the nightlife in Bellevue and Seattle, but I walked around them plenty and both of them are really, really beautiful. And there's a bunch of different food to try in downtown, from $200 steaks all the way to your standard Chipotle. Some of the touristy things that I partook in at my stays in Seattle were going to the beach to try and then fail to create a bonfire, going up the Space Needle, which is one of the more famous tourist attractions in Seattle. Basically, it's this really skinny building with a large section up on top where people pay almost $40 to ride the elevator from the ground all the way to the top. to see the city from a higher elevation. In my opinion, it's completely overrated, especially when these Amazon offices are so high these days that if you just take an elevator to the top floor, you're basically getting the same view. I also visited the Chihuly Glass Garden, which is right next to the Space Needle, and inside there's a bunch of interesting glass sculptures that were created by the same artist. I also went kayaking around the University of Washington, and that's how I found out that kayaking is a lot more work than it looks like. And finally, a group of friends and I went out to catch the Sea Fair, which is an annual air show event in Seattle. Funny story about the Sea Fair, me and my friends were trying to find a beach to watch the Sea Fair from, and we settled on one, Ubered there, and as we got out, we had no idea that we'd accidentally Ubered to a nude beach, and seeing those naked people really caught us by surprise. So yeah, that was the totality of my experience interning at Amazon for the past 2 summers. Overall, it was a great experience and a great introduction into the working world of software engineering. I hope this video helps if you're either recruiting for the first time or nervous about starting internships like I was, having imposter syndrome, all that stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.